Hello, everyone. I am Steve Krupinski, the Marketing Director at Michigan Radio. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. If this is your first time for an Issues in Ale event, pardon me, I haven't had any ale yet. This is a discussion series we host at Michigan Radio designed to engage people in conversations about issues and news stories that are going on here in Michigan. So we invite you to sit back with an ale or the beverage of your choice and enjoy our discussion. We are streaming tonight's event, of course, on both YouTube and Facebook. We'd love to take your questions. You can submit those at any time during the discussion, just using the comment or the chat box right there on YouTube and Facebook. We'll see those and we will try to answer as many of those as we can during the evening. I do want to make you aware of one other upcoming Michigan Radio event. This is an in-person event that's coming up in just a few weeks. Michigan Radio is pleased to welcome the Moth Main Stage to the Wharton Center in East Lansing on Tuesday, June 14th. The Moth Main Stage features a lineup of national and Michigan storytellers, each with a 10-minute story to tell live on stage without notes. Tickets for that show are still available, and you can get those at thewhartoncenter.com. To those of you in the audience who are sustainers or donors to Michigan Radio in any way, we want to thank you for your investment in the work that we do. You know, everything that Michigan Radio does, including events like this Issues in Ale, are made possible by your support, and we sincerely thank you for that. All right, let's get started. Our host for the evening is Michigan Radio's political junkie. That's Zoe Clark, and here is Zoe.
Thank you so much, Steve, and good evening, everyone. It is really, really great to be here. I'd say it's even greater to get to see all of your smiling faces, but there are two reasons that make that pretty darn hard this evening. The first is the fact that, as you can tell, this platform doesn't actually allow us, the panelists, to see you, who we are with tonight. We can, however, see each other, and I'm super excited to introduce you to the incredible folks tonight who are going to join our panel. We are thanking you, right, for welcoming us into your homes, your offices, pulled over in your cars, wherever you find yourself this evening with us. The more important fact, though, about why it's hard to smile this evening is we've all by now heard the absolutely horrific news out of Texas. Innocent lives ended too soon. I want to take a moment and just sit in that this evening. I want to honor that this evening. The fact is, the news cycle is such these days that it seems that we as a state are still grieving over the shooting in Oxford. That was just in November. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We are in the middle of dealing with the aftermath of a violent insurrection at the Capitol. There are lies about the state of our democracy and elections. Families cannot find baby formula. We are in really, really tough times. And the subject that we're talking about tonight has, I think, in many ways added to the extreme anxiety that people are feeling right now, right? But that's what we do as journalists. We lean into it. We ask questions of really smart people. We bring you the truth and we bring you the facts. So that's what we're doing with this Issues in Ale about the future of abortion rights in Michigan this evening. If you've been part of one of these in the past, you know they can be fun, they can be irreverent. You know, as Steve said, that we like to have an adult beverage or two. I can tell you I'm not going to be doing that tonight. That is because I am getting over COVID. You, of course, though, are more than welcome to, and most welcome, though, you are to please ask your questions. This forum is for you to have your questions answered for about the next hour or so. So please start typing them in, have them coming. With that, I want to welcome Dr. Lisa Harris. Lisa is both an MD and a PhD. So literally when I call her doctor, it makes it even easier for both of it. Dr. Harris is at the Institute for Healthcare Policy and Innovation at the University of Michigan. Doctor, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Next, I want to say hello to Professor Richard Friedman. He's the Aline and Alan Smith Professor of Law at the University of Michigan, a scholar when it comes to the Supreme Court. Welcome, Professor. It's so good for you to join us here this evening as well.
Thank you. Glad to be with you. And I appreciate what you said about Texas.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And finally, I want to welcome Rick Pluta, who in full disclosure is also my husband. He is the senior Capitol correspondent for the Michigan Public Radio Network and has nowhere near the amount of degrees that Dr. Harris and Professor Friedman have. Maybe they would lend Rick some. I feel like I should call you Senator or something, Rick, just to make up for the lack of titles.
I'm good.
Okay.
But I will borrow a degree.
I was going to say one or two. Before we get into the real deep dive that I want to turn to you, Professor Friedman, and just quickly get us up to date about how we find ourselves right now. You know, I think in the news quickly, we're just keep hearing, oh, the overturning of Roe v. Wade. That's not exactly what's at hand. It's not like the Supreme Court is picking up that case. Can you help us understand where we are right now in this moment, though, that the possibility of overturning Roe v. Wade is possible?
Sure. So Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973, and it was controversial from the beginning. And the Supreme Court has eaten away at it a good deal. One of my colleagues says, you know, it's really Planned Parenthood v. Casey, a case from the 1990s, that sets the law now. But the right to life movement has never reconciled itself with Roe v. Wade. There's always been attempting to challenge it. And now, you know, that President Trump had three appointments to the Supreme Court. It appears that the court is on the verge of overruling it. Now, it's important to recognize that what that does, it doesn't in itself make abortion illegal anywhere. What it would do, assuming that they do overrule Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, it would basically leave the question to the political process. And in many states, there's not going to be any change whatsoever because there's no there's in the political support. There isn't a law limiting abortion in the early periods. In some states, there will be an immediate change, at least for now. And Michigan is an interesting one.
Indeed, and I want to get to that, the fact that Michigan basically has, what this sort of trigger law. But before we get to that, Dr. Harris, can you put into perspective a little bit? I want to not have it be clouded just using the word abortion. I think there's so much context that comes with that word, but just give us some information about here in Michigan, who gets abortions and for what reasons?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's such a good question as a starting place. So in Michigan, people who have abortions are the same as the people around the country who have abortions. And it's really women, people from all walks of life. And I see all kinds of people in the over 20 years that I've been an OBGYN, and I've always included abortion care in my work. If you want to look at ideas about who is more likely to seek abortion care than other folks, then I think it's important to do that. And it's really people who have the fewest resources are the most likely to seek abortion care. The Guttmacher Institute, tells us that half of people who seek abortion care live under the federal poverty line, and 3/4 live 1 to 2 times that level. So that's a real good predictor of who may seek abortion care. But really, it's every person from every walk of life.
Rick, I want to get to you quickly and talk about just the what happened last week in Michigan, because I think likely if folks have been listening to Michigan radio or NPR or many, papers, and it seems like every news organization following this story right now, in Michigan in particular, there's a lot of different threads right now about what would happen if and when Roe v. Wade is overturned. The fact is we have a law that is still on the books from 1931. It's the most recent one. There was one actually from the 1800s, but 1931 is the most recent. That law would go back to being a law in Michigan if Roe v. Wade was overturned, except for the fact that something happened in the Court of Claims last week. And I'm hoping you can just give us a little update about what that decision was and what that means if, let's say, next week, the Supreme Court did put out a ruling that did overturn Roe v. Wade.
Right. This is the ACLU Planned Parenthood challenge. And Judge Elizabeth Gleicher on the Court of Claims ruled that the criminal abortion ban violates the Michigan Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. It stops pregnant women from accessing their rights to liberty, privacy, and bodily integrity. Basically, the Michigan Constitution has protections similar to the equal protection claims that are made in Roe versus Wade, and also that it violates the state's Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act because it creates a sex-based classification for denying medical care as opposed to what could be accessed by males.
So, up until that May 17th ruling by Justice Gleicher, we likely, if Roe v. Wade had been overturned, we would have been back to the 1931 law. It's a preliminary injunction, so we're waiting.
That was the expectation, yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Harris, talk to us about this moment that both providers, that women, that everybody finds themselves in. I call it a no man's land. I'm not sure what else, a legal limbo. I mean, these terms sound so small compared to really where we would find ourselves in Michigan. Talk from the provider perspective, can you? And also, I'm sorry, I know I just asked that, but I do also want to say to folks, please put your comments and questions. Otherwise, the four of us will just continue to talk and we could go at it. There's a little section right on your computer that should say comments. And if you put your questions there, we're going to take them. Dr. Harris, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So that question is exactly what I've been thinking about for months. I know that many people woke up to the idea that Roe might be overturned when the opinion was leaked, the draft opinion was leaked earlier this month. But for those of us who care for patients seeking abortion, we've always felt that Roe was quite precarious, and that there was a possibility that abortion care would no longer be available and Roe would be overturned. So we've been preparing at University of Michigan. We've been preparing since the Dobbs arguments were heard in December, because it was pretty clear at that moment that the justices would seriously consider overturning Roe versus Wade in their Dobbs opinion. So we've been getting ready for what that means from a patient care point of view. And there's really sort of only four things that are possible if Roe were to be overturned, and if the current injunctions, don't become permanent. The first question we've been asking is, who can we still care for? The Michigan law allows abortion care to happen to, and I'm quoting from the 1931 law, to preserve the life of a pregnant woman. That's the only exception. So the most important thing we need to figure out is what does that mean exactly? And sometimes it's obvious. My colleagues and I have performed abortions in intensive care units in critically ill patients where it's clear that they would die if you didn't do something. But other than that, it's really ambiguous what that means. It's not clear what chance of death someone would need to have and how imminently they might die. So we're trying to figure out who we can still care for. And that won't be most people. And for them, we will need to help them seek care out of state. For most people, that will be Illinois, will be the closest place within driving distance, maybe Canada, if folks have passports. So people can go out of state, they'll self-manage abortion, and we need to be prepared for the consequences of that as well. And people will give birth, and more people will give birth. And the estimates are that up to about 17% more births can be expected in Michigan if abortion becomes illegal in the state. So we're preparing for all of those scenarios.
There's a follow-up question there that I want to ask, and yet my brain is not quite sure what it is because it's so massive. I mean, talk to me about what that looks like as you try to prepare these four different possibilities. How much time and effort are you putting in them? It sounds to me like you guys are pretty certain that this is going to happen.
Well, in medicine in general, you always need to be ready for the worst or the worst complications, not just around a legal outcome, but in people's health and in people's bodies. So that's how we're approaching this here. We're preparing for abortion to be illegal in the state, and we're putting in many, many hours. University of Michigan today, in fact, announced that we have a task force to address a possible sort of post-Roe world. We've been working for months in the background before it was announced. But we also, if Michigan Supreme Court agrees that our Constitution actually protects abortion rights, then we're in the reverse situation where we're one of the very few Midwest states where abortion care will be available. Mm-hmm. So we're preparing for a ban. We're also preparing to be one of the few states, Illinois would be the other one, where abortion will remain available. So yes, many people are spending many, many hours thinking about this, and on the clinical care side and at University of Michigan, also on the university campus side, thinking about what it means.
Mm-hmm. Rick, I want to get to exactly what Dr. Harris brought up, which was the fact that we talked about the Court of Claims, the preliminary injunction. But really what that is about is because Governor Whitmer, actually, even before this leaked document came out from Samuel Alito, should be clear, I'm not saying Samuel Alito leaked it. It was a document of Samuel Alito's, that it was leaked. Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer used a special authority that only governors in Michigan have to bring up this question about the legality of this 1931 law. Where does that stand right now?
Well, the governor filed the case in Oakland County because there are Planned Parenthood clinics there. But she also, and this is what you're talking about, is asked for a bypass, a leapfrog over lower courts, and to have the Michigan Supreme Court issue what's basically a preemptive ruling on whether or not Michigan's Constitution has Roe-like protections in it, even though they might not be explicitly spelled out, that they are nevertheless there because the Michigan Constitution includes rights that are tantamount to privacy. The court that has that on its docket, it's asked for the governor to expand on her arguments as to why she thinks that this is appropriate in this situation. And the court has also invited other parties, including abortion rights opponents like Right to Life of Michigan, the Michigan Catholic Conference, to also weigh in on why that's not the case, including, legal technical questions about whether or not this is actually a ripe controversy without a ruling on Roe, and how far the governor's authority to make a request like that actually extends.
And am I remembering correctly that just this week, the Supreme Court gave both sides 14 days so we have a total of 28 days. Let's get to some of these questions. And Professor Friedman, just first from Sarah, who asked, if Roe is overturned, would that mean that the decision about abortion's rights would be left to each state?
Yes, at least initially, until such time as the federal government stepped in, and given gridlock in D.C., it seems unlikely that we're going to have congressional legislation anytime soon. And even if there were, there would be a constitutional issue with respect to that. But that's correct. Each state will decide on its own. And can I add? I've got a sense. I mean, I'm glad to hear from Lisa that and I'm not surprised that Michigan Medicine is preparing for every contingency. But if I had to bet, I would bet that the Michigan Supreme Court will decide that case relatively soon. As you say, there's 2 weeks for the governor and then 2 weeks for others. But 3 of the justices were chomping at the bit. They wanted to do it all within 2 weeks. And Justice Bernstein said, hey, let's give everybody a chance. My guess is that relatively quickly, 4-3, the Supreme Court is going to hold that the state constitution protects something on the order of the old Roe framework, or we'll see, but at least protects early term abortions. That's my bet.
Dr. Harris, I'm sorry, you were looking like you were unmuting yourself. Did you want to jump
in? I was just curious to hear more. What gives you that feeling?
Well, so if you look at the procedural order of that laid out the timeline, the court sort of asked questions of the governor and wanted the briefing, and 3 of the Democratic justices, and they can be identified by party. 3 of them said, hey, we ought to do this all within 2 weeks, have it all within 2 weeks. That means they're chomping at the bit to get this decided. And if you're chomping at the bit to get it decided, it's because you want to decide that the decision is going to make a difference, which means that the state constitution would enter in. And Justice Bernstein wrote a separate opinion saying, hey, I want to make sure everybody gets a vote. Gets a voice here, but I'd be surprised if he didn't go along with them on the substance. So that's why I'm saying I think once all the procedure is in, well, then there'll have to be further substantive briefing, but they're going to move it along reasonably quickly. I think that's a guess.
Well, I'm looking
at this point. They're just talking about the procedures. Should they expedite? But my guess is they're going to expedite, and they'll come out with a decision under the state constitution.
Well, then let me ask this question before we get to the other comments, because this has been a question of sort of palace intrigue in our household between Rick and I, is how much do the justices, of course, to make things easier and to make things less complicated, as Dr. Harris, you're talking about, making a decision before the Supreme Court does would sort of, make it incredibly clear in the state, right? They could make it incredibly clear. Well, but we've also been talking about the fact is, does this Supreme Court want the Michigan Supreme Court want to make that decision if they don't absolutely have to, if the Supreme Court hasn't ruled yet?
Yeah. Well, there's an argument, and Planned Parenthood is making the argument that they shouldn't. That it's premature because nothing would depend on it. But as I say, I think at least three, and my guess is that four would say, well, you know, assuming that Roe was overruled, this is going to become very important very quickly, and the state constitution is a separate body of law from whatever the U.S. Supreme Court is doing, and so we've got to get that set. You're right. I mean, it's an issue, and it's going to be argued. Why are you going to do that right now? I should say also, even if they don't come down with a decision on the merits of the case right now, or within several weeks, it is possible that even if the Court of Claims decision were vacated, it is possible that the state Supreme Court would enter a preliminary injunction or a temporary restraining order very quickly, as soon as such time as Roe, as the Dobbs decision came down. Yeah. And my guess is they would do that.
Dr. Lisa Harris, I want to get to a question from Jeff, who says, what penalties are there written into the 1931 law? You know, we keep talking about criminalization, but what are the penalties that are written into the law?
I'm going to defer to Professor Friedman on that one. I don't know what the specific penalties are, to be honest.
It's a felony, and I believe it's 5 years in prison, up to 5 years in prison. And by the way, I mean, that requires prosecution. There's got to be a prosecutor to go after it. And the Attorney General, of course, says she will not enforce that law if it comes back to life. And many of the district attorneys, there are 13 counties that have abortion providers in them, or clinics at least. And at least several of those have said they won't, but there's at least the prosecutor in Macomb County. I'm not sure if the others who said they would. The other factor related to that is that it's got a 6-year statute of limitations, and the Attorney General can enforce it. So if you're an abortion provider and you don't want to take a chance of prosecution, you've got to worry about not only this election for Attorney General, but the next election. That is, if nothing else happens.
Right.
And you should also mention, I assume we're going to get to it soon, the possibility of the constitutional amendment.
Yes. Yes, yeah. that the petition drive, and I do want to talk about that. But Rick, I want to jump in because you've covered the Attorney General Dana Nessel, who said she wouldn't prosecute, but you have prosecutors in counties, some of whom have said they will, some of whom have said they won't.
Yeah. Exactly. And actually, one of them even filed a case today asking that the abortion case be taken away from Judge Gleicher, and obviously seeking a different result.
Well,
who was that? I'm curious. Which county, do you know? Which county?
Jackson County.
Jackson County. Okay. All right.
Rick, we brought up a little bit about the idea of enshrining these rights into the state constitution. There is a group of folks right now, in fact, folks who are watching right now may have seen some of these petition gatherers trying to gather more than 425,000 signatures, valid signatures, by July 11th to get this on the November ballot. Talk a little bit. You were on a call, I think, just today, right, with groups who are trying to push this as a way to enshrine abortion rights.
Not the ballot question, per se, but yeah, there is a petition drive in the field to put into the state constitution Roe-like protections, and I suspect that they will continue that regardless of what happens in court. One of the interesting dynamics that's played out in Michigan politics on this issue is that it's been kind of difficult to organize around abortion rights because of the Roe versus Wade decision, and that people who, even if they feel passionately about abortion rights, didn't necessarily have to make that a top tier issue when making choices about things like who to vote for. And so a petition drive to amend the Constitution certainly, plays into that specifically, but also into, elections and, whether or not that will make a difference in terms of candidates who support or oppose abortion rights.
Can I just underline that? I mean, I agree absolutely. The old line about nothing focuses the mind so much as the prospect of hanging,
Yeah.
and I think I think it, to some extent, Roe has rendered the pro-choice side politically lazy. I mean, that's perhaps an overstatement, but it captures the view that the hard work is doing things like getting petition drives, getting those hundreds of thousands of signatures, and there's been a sense of well, we don't need it because there's that decision, and it's been an odd thing in that it's still been a political issue, but it's been filtered through things like nominations of Supreme Court justices, and then to a large extent presidential politics. If Roe is overturned, it brings it home down to the nitty gritty level of.
And we should point out that Right to Life of Michigan, the organization, is a political machine that they've got petition drives down. They've run multiple ones, and they're very, very good at it. That they've got an endorsement process and political action that goes behind it, and it's made the organization a formidable force in Michigan politics for multiple generations, and that we will see. I think that Dr. Friedman put it very well. Is this going to focus progressive organizations on this issue in particular? And we'll see what kind of a difference that makes, both in terms of policy making in the state capitol, who we send to Congress and who we send to the legislature, and basically things like registration and voter turnout.
Well, and we know that Planned Parenthood actually said that when this rule, or when the opinion was leaked, they got something like 25,000 folks getting in touch about volunteering. I want to ask a question, and I have to say I'm not actually sure that we will be able to have a significant answer to this, because my guess is so much of if this were to make it into the Constitution would be litigated. But Mary Jo asks, and I'm going to say if. Mary Jo says when the ballot proposal passes. I'm going to just say if. But if the ballot proposal passes, would that mean that the legislature cannot pass legislation like making women undergo a physical exam before having an abortion?
I don't believe the proposed constitutional amendment would protect genuine health related provisions, but it would prevent anything that would prevent legislation that would prevent abortions. Now, so there may be room for debate as to the meaning in cases like that. And
I just wanted to add that there are certainly medical things that could be legislated, but a physical exam prior wouldn't be one of them. There's not medical necessity for that. There may be for other things that the legislature might want to make a decision on, but a physical exam prior wouldn't be the one that I would.
I would look at I want to look at the text of the of it. And,
well, I have, and that's why I'm wondering if this couldn't be litigated in the courts.
Right.
Dr.
Anything the legislature does would probably be litigated just to, for one side or the other. In the case of what you're talking about there, probably the, anti-abortion groups would come in to try and narrow that as much as possible.
Yeah. Dr. Harris, I want to ask a question from Leila. And Leila, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna change the focus a little bit. So what Leila says is medical should be focusing on promoting birth control and moral laws instead of using abortion, which is murder, as birth control, is what Leila said. Dr. Harris, I'd love to hear from you about, again, this sort of either or, that abortion, somehow is this choice about birth control, when in many respects, as you and your research has shown, a lot of times it has nothing to do with birth control. It has to do with health outcomes.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question to ask and to answer, because I think abortion makes people uncomfortable. And I think that is a really normal thing, to have uncomfortable feelings about abortion and wish it would go away, because abortion means that a baby's not going to be born. And that feels very big and weighty. On the other hand, banning abortion means that girls and women would essentially be forced to continue pregnancies that they either can't or don't want to. And that's also really weighty. So I think for me, I can't see it as just one thing or just another thing. I have to hold it all. And, in over 20 years of caring for patients, I see them holding all of that complexity as well. So the other thing I might just add is that many of the same people who provide abortion care are also people providing most of the contraception care in the country. And that's true here in Michigan as well. And, again, I've been a doctor for almost 25 years, over 25 years. And I've never seen a person kind of have abortions instead of contraception. I mean, if that were true, most women by the time they hit menopause would have 15 or 20 or 30 abortions. And I've just never seen that in my life, in my career. So I know it's a real natural thing to not want there to be abortion. And, but I haven't seen people use it in the way that the listener described.
I'd like to jump in on that, the point that Dr. Harris made about it being weighty, and the ambivalence, if that's the right word, certainly has played out in the public opinion research that we've seen in Michigan, which I think tracks what we've seen around the country, which is that people generally favor abortion rights, although they don't favor unfettered abortion rights. And it can kind of run the gamut, that even abortion on demand is kind of a misnomer, because states do restrict abortions, even under Roe. And people, like I said, generally you can argue about which restriction you favor, which restriction you don't, but people have expressed time and time again that ambivalence about exactly where the line should be drawn.
Can I, before we move on, I want to just go back to the prior question, because I was looking at the text of the proposed constitutional amendment. It always helps to look at the text. So it says, an individual's right to reproductive freedom shall not be denied, burdened, nor infringed upon unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means. And then after viability, then it could be abortion could be prohibited, provided that the pregnant person would have a right to have life and physical and mental health protected. So compelling state interest, least restrictive means. That's a very tough standard. That's a very rigorous standard. It's saying if you want to provide any restrictions, you've got to show really that you really need it, and that you can't do it by something. Boy, did I just get upstage? And you can't do it by anything that creates less of an imposition. So I think if the legislature willy-nilly said, "Oh, all women who want to have an abortion are going to have a physical exam," there'd be a very strong argument. It would be litigated, but I think there'd be a very strong argument that no, that's not. There's no compelling need for that, and that's certainly not the least restrictive means.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Okay. Doctors, how has, since the Roe decision came down, there have been medical advancements that allow for pregnancies to be rescued earlier and earlier. And that certainly, it seems to me, throws some complications into legal analyses on when it would be appropriate or not appropriate, when viability occurs earlier and earlier and earlier because of medical advances. How do you see that playing out in in this particular controversies, the questions that it raises, and how they might be answered, if they can be?
I can start. Would that be okay? Yeah.
Please.
So, viability, it actually hasn't changed as dramatically as you might imagine in the past 50 years. And certainly now about 24 weeks is still considered the point of viability. And it's been that point for, several decades. It doesn't mean that there haven't been isolated cases where babies have survived prior to that, but it's not a line that actually keeps shifting down and down and down lower in gestation. It seems to have settled at about 24 weeks. That said, and I understand that people like there to be a line that you can't be crossed, because it's people. I think you want to know there's some moral or ethical guardrails there, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really normal and natural thing, that good people want to know that there are some limits. I can say as a care provider, though, that there isn't a line, there isn't a one-size-fits-all law that I've seen that would serve all of the patients that I meet or that are cared for around the country. There are many people who get new information about their pregnancy, about diagnoses and illnesses in their baby that sometimes happens even after that point of viability. Currently, that's not care that we can provide here in Michigan because of state law, but there are several places in the country where that can be provided. And again, I guess I want to emphasize that there are ethical and moral guardrails, but it can't always necessarily be the point of viability. And how to explain what those are, I guess, there's a lot of stigma and negative stereotypes about people who have abortions and about the people who provide that care. And it's been my experience that those are really untrue, and that the most compassionate and smart and ethical people that I know are doing this work. And I guess I don't know if that provides any reassurance at all to folks, but it is important to know.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think viability it's not at all self-evident that should be the line. I mean, I agree with Lisa on this. I mean, everybody has their own moral guideposts on this. There isn't any one thing that it's sort of, that's clearly it. Obviously, there's some people who feel that from the moment of conception, it's tantamount to murder. There are other people who, well, it's okay until it starts to look like a baby. Viability is another point. One thing I always emphasize to my students is, you have to look at this at different levels. One is the personal level. When would you feel, when, if at all, would you feel comfortable if you or a loved one, if let's say you were consulted by a loved one, in what circumstances would you feel that an abortion is a morally acceptable thing to do? And for many people, that's very circumstance dependent. Not only the length of how far along the pregnancy is, but all sorts of other things. Are there abnormalities? What's the type, and all of that? It's a very, very personal decision. People have very different views. A second question is, well, if you're the legislature, what do you think the rule should be? The question before the Supreme Court is, well, we're not deciding a personal question. We're not deciding as if we're legislators. We're deciding if we're a court, what laws should we allow? I'll say for me, I'm probably like most Americans. I think if I were asked by a loved one, I would find it very difficult in certain circumstances. In some circumstances, no. If I were a legislator, I'd go all the way. I'd say I don't want to make the decision. I'd let it go to 9 months. Let the woman make that decision with consultation. If I'm a court and the legislature has come up with something else, that's a different question. So I think, yeah, there are no fixed lines here. Lines may appeal to any particular person, but that's very much a personal choice, I think.
Well, it certainly appeals to judges.
Well, I mean, look, lawmakers, whether legislators or judges, have to come up with some kind of line, some kind of standard. It can be a fuzzy one. I think viability is a somewhat fuzzy one, right? I'm assuming that there are cases in which viability is in doubt, right? Am I right? Lisa, yeah.
Yeah. Even when we talk about viability, we're talking about a point where, maybe 50 to 80% of babies would survive. It's not a point where 100%.
Right. You don't go from 0 to 100.
Right.
And I assume it's not simply a matter of the clock, but all sorts of other factors.
There are all kinds of other factors.
Yeah.
What's going on in the pregnancy?
But if you're going to have law, then there has to be some kind of standard. And sometimes the standard is fuzzy and difficult. Sometimes it's bright line. That's what Roe v. Wade tried to do, was come up with bright lines. 13 weeks, up to 13 weeks, they can't do anything. Up to 26, they can regulate health and life of the mother, and then they can prohibit.
Then is it fair to say, I mean, in some respects, then did Casey sort of make that more difficult by saying suddenly, well, no standards?
Well, it wasn't no standards. It was undue burden, which is a wiffly waffly standard.
Okay, I shouldn't have said no standards, a wiffly waffly standard.
Yeah. What you were saying is that sometimes the standards are murky.
It made a very murky standard, and so we've had more than a quarter century of contestation about that ever since. Sure. Yeah.
Well, I want to get to some more questions because we're getting quite a few that aren't just about abortion, right? But this conversation about if abortion rights change, what's next, which I think is also providing a lot of anxiety for people. And so Stephanie says just that. What will this mean for the future of other rights? She's saying, I'm hearing things being thrown around about interracial marriage and access to contraception will be in order or will be in danger if Roe v. Wade is overturned. Is that, and anyone who'd like to jump in, I mean, is that hyperbole when we hear people talk about it in that way?
I don't think there's any serious danger on either of those particular fronts. I mean, as a theoretical matter, it could be that this court would say that if there were a law, say banning contraception, that law would be constitutional, that too must be left to the political process. But you'd have to have a legislature passing a law, and you'd have to have enforcement. And I don't think that's likely to happen. Okay. Interracial marriage is a whole different thing. I mean, it's that has a firm basis in equal protection. And so the argument that this is an unenumerated right would not, I don't think would fly. So yes, you can imagine all sorts of horribles, but and I'm not going to say horrible things don't happen, but things that seem almost unimaginable or unlikely. I'm not going to lose any sleep over the possibility that access to contraception is going to be prohibited. That's not to say there won't be some legislators, some candidates who would advocate that.
Well, we have a candidate running for the state legislature right now who's endorsing that fact. So
I know.
I hear what you're saying, that you're not worried, but the fact is this is what some folks are talking about.
Yeah. I mean, and she's one, and I think most people say, well, she's out there, right? Let's see.
It's certainly not a mainstream opinion. Yeah,
it's not a mainstream opinion. It's not close to it. And if a party became associated with that view, they would get demolished at the polls. I believe at the ballot box, as one colleague said there are too many Republican voters who care about having access to contraception.
The examples that I hear most often are contraception and same-sex marriage, and the criticism of Roe from a technical standpoint was that it created a right that's not explicitly stated in the U.S. Constitution. Although there are lots of decisions that emanate from things like rights to privacy. Certainly, due process is just a is just a huge one, and there is any any right, something like same-sex marriage, for instance, would take a long time, just like Roe and the point that we find ourselves at right now, to take a long time to come about. And don't forget, just like in Roe, and I don't know which side of that particular argument this supports, but right now in terms of same-sex marriage, for example, contraception, that lives are built around lives in communities are built around the fact that those rights exist right now. And clearly any effort to just make those evaporate would be very, very, very tenuous, for a whole bunch of reasons, not the least of them being stare decisis, which is the principle that you don't reverse a legal decision absent a very, very compelling reason to do so, because stability in the law is very, very important because of the impact on people's lives.
Yeah.
There is. Go ahead.
Sorry.
I was going to, there is a piece of this that does keep me up at night a little bit, and it relates to pregnancy. And it's a piece of Roe that I don't think people think about a lot. But when Roe said that basically an unborn human is a fetus, is not a person, it was basically the first articulation of the rights of a pregnant woman. It was basically the equivalent of saying, and a person when they're pregnant, a woman when they're pregnant, is a person with full constitutional rights. I mean, the Constitution didn't deal with pregnancy or women for that matter. Mm-hmm. And so Roe was actually, to my knowledge, the first and best articulation of the rights that someone has when they're pregnant. And Casey went even a little bit further to further define those rights. And it's those two decisions that say, when a woman is pregnant, she still maintains all of her constitutional rights to health. The state can show an interest in the fetus, in potential life, but not if the life of a pregnant woman is in jeopardy, not if the health of a pregnant woman's in jeopardy, and in Casey, not if the liberty of a pregnant woman would be threatened. And so my concern is the impact of an overturn of Roe on all women, on all people who become pregnant, even those continuing pregnancy. So Roe isn't just a decision about ending pregnancy. It's about the rights you have when you continue a pregnancy. And my concern is the way that pregnancy itself and what women do or how they behave in pregnancy has a big potential to become criminalized broadly, or for medical orders to carry the force of law, medical recommendations to begin carrying the force of law. So Roe has implications not just for people ending a pregnancy, but for people mm-hmm. continuing a pregnancy.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about like fetal alcohol. Women who
yes, but it's a slippery slope, right? It could be substance use, people with substance use disorders. It could be getting in a car. It could be going downhill skiing. I mean, there was a case of a woman who was shot in pregnancy, and the person who shot her was not charged with a crime. The pregnant woman herself was charged with a crime for putting her fetus in a situation where it would be endangered. And there are many, many cases of pregnant women being detained, arrested, prosecuted, imprisoned for something that would not be illegal if you were not pregnant, but because someone was pregnant was made a crime.
Yeah. I agree that that is a concern. That case, I think, as I recall, the woman was acquitted, and it was a bad move by the prosecutor. I mean, I don't disagree with you that it's a concern. I think that prosecutors are going to have to. they're going to be constrained to a considerable extent, I think, by the political realities.
Well, and I mean, let's jump into that for a minute, which is something that we've been talking a lot about on Michigan radio. You know, we've had interviews with the prosecutors, a couple of them, Kim Worthy in Wayne County, Karen McDonald, Oakland County. As we talked about, Dana Nessel, the Attorney General, saying they won't. Pete Lucido, however, is a prosecutor in Macomb County who, I mean, you know, who didn't say he wouldn't. But the issue that he was, you know, we're trying to get to is this idea, well, like, how do you actually go about and get the evidence to prosecute? And how does that work or even look like? I mean, if this is going to be a criminal case against a doctor, I mean, do you have investigators going out to get evidence?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I'm also not convinced that women themselves would not be prosecuted. There are some states where their criminal bans have a little sentence at the end that says, but this law is not at all intended to apply to the pregnant woman herself. But Michigan's ban doesn't have that. And so, you know, there potentially could be legal consequences to people who self-manage an abortion, or certainly to the people who help them, whether that's a friend or a mother, grandmother.
Well, it just seems like, too, the ramifications, I mean, just as something as simple as HIPAA, too. But I mean, again, these are issues to grapple with in the future, possibly.
Can I just say, I think for the most part, I don't want to overstate it, but I think pro-life advocates and prosecutors and all have wanted to shy away from prosecuting the women, and they've said, oh no, that's not going to happen. I mean, they're worried about that on political grounds. So I'm not going to say it wouldn't happen, but I do think that there's, again, a political constraint.
I want to get to some more questions here as we get to wrap up this hour, but we'll go through some more. Joe, who says, what are some legal justifications if women who were going to try to travel to another state to receive these services, right? She's wondering, when can a state government, or could a state government restrict individual travel? So again, Dr. Harris, to your point of maybe helping women get to Canada, getting to Illinois, is that something that somehow could become criminalized? I think maybe that's what Joy's trying to get to.
I mean, some states are trying to reach beyond their state boundaries to criminalize. Missouri has I don't know if it passed or it's just a proposed bill that would not allow people to leave the state. And there are some states that want to enlist the help of law enforcement in another state if someone provides legal care there to someone out of state. So I think, I don't know, I'm curious what your take on that is, Professor Friedman.
Well, it's a big open question. I mean, the Supreme Court has spoken in the past about a right to travel, a right to interstate travel, and that would certainly be a contention here. Now, you know, can a state prevent somebody who is in the state from trying to leave the state in order to do something elsewhere that would be illegal in the state? I mean, that's going to be, if these states do go forward with this, it would be very much an open question, I believe. And there's been debate on, you know, the constitutional law professors list about that. I do think that kind of law in most cases would be very, very hard to enforce.
What about
can I just say, particularly, I mean, if somebody in St. Louis goes across the bridge to Illinois to get an abortion, it's going to be very hard to enforce that.
Well, what about the crime of strictly within a state's borders of aiding someone to go and do something that would be illegal, you know, in that state?
Yeah.
I mean,
So
the question is whether or not you get that interstate nexus for, you know, because that would make it federal.
My guess is that this Supreme Court would hold that a state could prevent somebody within the state from doing that, but again, it's not clear because because if you're assisting a constitutional right to travel, then maybe that's constitutionally protected. I mean, it's, you know, I hate to say it's uncertain, but there's a lot of uncertainty.
There are clinical implications to this because more than half of abortions in the U.S. are with medications now. The
Just
pills,
what I was going to ask you, Dr. Harris. Yeah.
mifepristone and misoprostol, and that's not an instantaneous process. It takes, you know, a minimum of several hours, but sometimes it can be several days before a pregnancy will pass after someone uses those medications. So that's a question I have, that if someone legally obtained medications in Illinois and took them there and then came home and passed their pregnancy in Michigan, is that an illegal abortion? Or if they thought they passed their pregnancy in Illinois, but turns out it was bleeding, but they didn't really, and it happens later in Michigan, is that illegal? Can a doctor treat them at that point, or are they completing an illegal abortion?
Yeah. I think if the if the act that caused the abortion were in Illinois, then I don't think another state could prohibit you being sick in Missouri, say, and they couldn't prohibit somebody from getting the necessary medical care. I understand the completion idea, but if the die had already been cast, I think that would be safe. Can I just say? I mean, I think the whole situation we're now thinking nationally is going to be very complicated. I mean, one thing is I think Rick adverted to it. It's going to alter the political landscape a great deal. There is going to be enormous amounts of money coming into organizations that support abortion, and I think that's going to make it feasible for many women who would not otherwise be able to afford it to go elsewhere if need be. And I think corporate America is going to have a voice, and it's going to be very interesting how that plays out. But for example, this Oklahoma law, I just wonder how many national corporations are going to be interested in relocating into Oklahoma, and what kind of resistance they're going to get from many of their employees. So I think long term, I think it's going to be a much more complicated situation than appears right now. And for those who favor abortion access, I think it'll be much more favorable than it appears immediately.
I mean, I think we're seeing that right now, and whether it be because of a younger generation or not. I mean, I think about Florida and everything that's happening with Disney and Ron DeSantis, right? Dr. Harris, we talked a little bit. Let's play this out a little bit. We talked a little bit about all the work that you're doing if Roe v. Wade is overturned, and let's say, the 1931 law in Michigan ends up staying the 1931 law in Michigan, but let's push back and look at things a little differently. Let's say the Michigan Supreme Court does say, yes, it's not constitutional under this Michigan Constitution, or let's say that, or both of these things could happen. Let's say the petition drive is successful. It gets on the ballot in November. It does get passed. Talk to me a little bit about what that would mean for Michigan if and then Roe v. Wade is overturned still, and we then become a state. Would we then become a state that women come to? And what does that look like for our infrastructure? Do we have the infrastructure for that if we become a state like Illinois, where people are coming? Or is that happening already?
Well, we do see, I don't think we have the infrastructure to take care of everyone from Ohio and Indiana and, Missouri. But we do see people from around the country already. Almost every week this past month, we've seen someone from Texas. And so that's wow. Who've flown up or driven up because they couldn't get care there. We've very routinely for years seen people from Ohio because it's a harder place to get abortion care than many other places. So it already has been a state that people will come to. But if we become a state where abortion is protected and our neighboring states don't have those same protections, we probably would become a place that will see more patients. But the infrastructure isn't there right now for that. So that is something that we'll need careful careful planning if people are going to get the care that they need.
Can I add, the historical analogy that's occurred to me has been the Underground Railway, which of course occurred before the Civil War to help enslaved people escape to freedom. And I suspect that that in states that do allow ready access to abortion, that there will be something on the order of that many people feeling a strong moral imperative will do what they can to, in money, opening up their homes if need be, whatever, to enable people to come from other states.
There was a version of that, or I should say, versions of that pre-Roe in
Yeah, absolutely.
states where abortion was outlawed.
Right.
Dr.
Still
Harris?
it still will be very, very difficult for people who need to travel. I just want to make
So
that
that's
clear.
exactly what I wanted to ask you. At the very beginning, we were talking about who the patients are and who are the women that need to. And, they're not necessarily people who can just, get a plane ticket, right? Or fill up a tank of gas and take 3 days off of work. Talk to me a little bit. I think you wanted to jump in there, and that was my question.
That was exactly what I was going to say. And it's already, even in our current conditions, it's a struggle for many people to get abortion care. The other thing that I didn't say earlier when you asked me who gets abortions, most people who end a pregnancy are already mothers. Over 60% of people who have an abortion have one or more children already, which means that they know what is happening. People aren't having an abortion, not knowing that they're not going to give birth. It's a struggle to get childcare. Many people are working hourly wage jobs where leaving the state for a day or 2 days or needing to be overnight is going to be very difficult. Getting childcare and overnight childcare is going to be very difficult. So yes, I fully agree that more people are stepping up to help, and there will be more funds going to local and national abortion funds to help people. And I'm sure there'll be people offering rides in their homes, but it's still going to be a struggle for many people. And not everyone is going, it's not going to be feasible for everyone to travel out of state for care. And if it were to happen, the average distance in Michigan would increase to about 260 miles for care. But we're talking about the reverse scenario now, and I don't know what that distance is for other folks, but I do know that it would be a struggle.
It already is a struggle.
It already is a struggle,
right?
People. I mean, one thing that's got to be borne in mind is that we say we're in a regime of Roe, and I've said, well, Roe was cut back on, but a lot of what states have done in many states, abortion access to abortion is pretty poor as it is.
Yeah. Well, I want to. We have a nice comment from Sarah that I think we will end the questions from, and it's just a comment who says, "I wish we could do this panel for 3 or 4 hours." Sarah, I think there's certainly enough questions and anxiety, as I said earlier, and I know that we are going to continue to cover this subject. How can we not, right? I guess what I would love to end with is, first, Dr. Harris, I'd love to end with you about just some final thoughts about, again, being in the mix, seeing this firsthand. I think a lot of folks who have these debates around the dinner table don't have it and aren't as close to you. And I'd love some final thoughts from you.
Yeah.
And I've got some questions for
Sure.
the professor and for Rick.
It's such a good point that you just made, because abortion is so polarizing and so politicized. I think that it's really easy to forget that it's people's experience. It's their lived experience. And many women experience this. I'm sure you know the numbers that between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 women have an abortion by the end of their reproductive life. So it's a really common shared experience. Because of stigma, people don't talk about it a lot, and we get a vicious cycle where people don't talk about it. People think it's not a common thing, and that further stigmatizes it, and that makes people less and less likely to talk about it. So, but it's a common shared experience, and it affects the lives of many women and many families. I think that's the main thing that I want people to know. And I guess the other thing I'll say is, that I know there are lots of negative stereotypes of the people who provide abortion care, and that may really impact what people think abortion law and policy needs to be. And I wish you could spend time with me, with my colleagues, to see what care on the ground is really like, because it would probably be very reassuring.
Thank you for that, Doctor. Rick Pluta, I'd love to go to you next. What are you going to be looking for on the ground level statewide, both in, the legal avenues, I guess I would say right now, again, in the state level over the next couple weeks, months?
Well, I mean, over the couple of weeks, the arguments that we're going to see on the cases on whether or not abortion is in fact a protected right in Michigan, regardless of what happens with Roe. Remember, even Gretchen Whitmer who is an attorney, has reversed herself on this. That originally she said that if Roe is completely overturned, then abortion is illegal in Michigan. And now she's going to the Michigan Supreme Court asking for a ruling that says exactly the opposite. Now, in fairness, as this became more and more of a reality, obviously attorneys were fly-specking the law and looking at language and precedents to try and determine if there was an alternative. But I think that also speaks to just what the landscape is going to look like. If Roe is overturned, then it's not like we're going to be instantly into this new situation, because everyone is going to be trying to figure it out, both technically in terms of where particular services might be available, how they could access them, might they have to cross state lines or not, whether or not things could be available very privately and clandestinely. Those are all things that are going to be sorted out in the political and legal processes. And it's gonna be messy. That, once a decision on Roe comes down, if Roe is in fact reversed, that is certainly not going to be the end of the question. And then, going on after that, when you look at the impact on elections, that, when I started covering politics in the 1980s, when pre-Roe was still something that people remembered, that abortion rights weren't something that every party had a position, which is kind of where we're at right now. That there were pro-choice Republicans, just like there were pro-choice Democrats. There were also Democrats who were opposed to abortion rights, just like there were Republicans who were opposed to abortion rights. And these were positions that were fought out within the within the political parties, in primaries and at conventions. And we could see that again, because it's not something that necessarily naturally fits into the political philosophies of Republicans or Democrats. It's something that evolved over time, and an overturn of Roe could certainly upset that, along with a lot of other things.
Interesting. And Professor Friedman, I want to end with you. I know a lot of folks kind of wake up every day, right, gripping their phone, looking at the headlines. We do know some things, though, about when the Supreme Court does rule. Am I correct? It's Mondays and Tuesdays, and on the third Wednesdays of when they're sitting. Do you have a sense of when folks should be most likely around their computers or phones at 10 a.m., waiting?
Yeah. I mean, if you want, you can go to the Supreme Court website, and they indicate dates on which they may issue decisions. In recent years, they've usually dropped the biggest bombshells at the very end of the term, right near the end, because I think they've just been working on them until the end. So I would guess it's going to be late June.
And what's the first thing? I mean, you're a scholar, how do you read them? What's the first thing that you do when you see the opinion that we should all do and follow in your footsteps?
Well, I mean, if you're actually looking at the text, but you'll probably hear about the result before you read it. But you look at the syllabus and to see what the result is and where the votes are, and it's a pretty good guess. Pretty good guess. We'll see, but there'll probably be 5 votes for overruling Roe. I would guess that the Chief Justice would say he'd like to knock out or rather uphold the statute in Mississippi without overruling Roe altogether, and the 3 more liberal members of the court will write an angry dissent. Yeah, and can I just say also that it's been nearly 50 years of Roe, and the issue has not gone away. And I really think that if it's not overturned, the issue is still not going to go away.
Mhm.
What makes some issues go away after a while is reaching a political accommodation. And I think if it's overturned, I think abortion rights advocates should embrace the opportunity to be very active in the political process and to make it come out favorably. Obviously, people on all sides will, but as I say, it's the abortion rights advocates have been the ones who have been dependent on Roe. But it may be that over time you get legislation that achieves some kind of equilibrium. I don't think we've ever been in equilibrium on this.
Yeah. And I think we can all agree it's pretty insane when we think that 1973 was 50 years ago. I feel like it's half a century.
I was a law student. No, not quite.
Well, I'm so appreciative of all of your brains for your time tonight. Dr. Lisa Harris with the University of Michigan, Professor Richard Friedman with the University of Michigan, Rick Pluta with the Michigan Public Radio Network, who I also should give a shout out, getting over COVID too as well. So thank you for the time. I really appreciate it. And to everybody watching this evening, thank you for all of your questions. Thank you for your time. And of course, we'll continue to cover this with these really smart folks on Michigan Radio in the future. All the best.